If you ask recruiters or successful small business owners about networking, they will both tell you it's one of the most important things you could be doing. For job seekers, it allows you to tap into that hidden job market. And for small business owners, it's a way to find collaborators and to plug into that, hey, I know a guy part of the brain that we all have. Unfortunately, there is a huge difference between networking and networking well. There's a buddy of mine who always likes to say, what do you call the guy that finishes last in medical school? The answer, doctor, proving that there is a difference between doing a thing and doing a thing well. So I want everyone who watches this video to not just network, but network well. So I have a few principles I would like to go over that if you are able to incorporate these into your day-to-day networking, you will find a lot more success than maybe you're finding right now. The biggest mistake that new networkers make is trying to create a pitch that has mass appeal, especially middle-aged folks who find themselves looking for work or are pivoting to a small business. They're like, hey, I've had a long career. I can do all these different things. So the best way that I can make sure that I don't get rejected is to cast this wide net where I say, oh, my company can do this. It can also do that and this. And same thing if they're looking for work, that I have all these skills over here and all these skills over here. And the problem is they're casting a wide but very thin net. There's an old axiom in Hollywood that says something to the effect of, if you try to make a movie for everyone, you'll end up making a movie for no one. Whereas if you attempt to make a movie for a specific audience with a specific voice, it'll appeal to everyone. And the reason for that is authenticity. So going back to networking, rather than casting a wide net of all of these things that you could do, instead boil down to one thing that you really want to do, something that you're passionate about, and that when you talk about that thing, that passion comes out. That is going to leave the mark in people's brains and is going to have them thinking and talking about you long after the networking event is over. With authenticity in mind, let's now look at another principle, which is the pitch. Everyone who networks needs to be able to generate on demand a 30-second or so pitch. But that is not the same as scripting out a 30-second pitch. The quickest way to turn off a prospective audience is to come at them with something that feels very rehearsed. Instead, what you want to do is you want to memorize some bullet points that you keep in your head all the time that refer back to that authentic you, that thing you're passionate about. Make sure you have a few bullets that can talk about those things so that you can customize your pitch depending on what situation you need to deliver it at. Are you at a networking event where everyone gets around in a circle and gives their pitch? You want to be light on your feet. So if someone else in the room does something similar to you or something you can piggyback off of, you want to be able to do that to show that you're not only engaged with what you're trying to get out of your mouth, but also engaged with the room. Same thing if you're in a more conversational setting where someone says, what do? You want to be able to talk about it, but not in a way that sounds like an infomercial. And the most important thing, your pitch needs to answer two questions. What problems do you solve, and how are you different than everyone else in your space? For small business owners, this is pretty instinctive. For job seekers, you don't necessarily think of yourself against your competition. You tend to just think about you against the job, as it were, but you need to be thinking about how you are different than other people who might be applying for the same job. And not just, I can do the job, but these are the problems specifically that I solve, because hiring managers love to hear how you are going to solve their problems. So the first two principles talked about talking, about being authentic, and about being able to get that authenticity using your pitch. Now, next, we're going to talk about listening, specifically active listening. There's a pretty famous Maya Angelou quote that goes, I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. When you are talking to someone in a networking setting, don't just nod. Don't just say, yeah, uh-huh. Instead, engage with what they are saying. Ask thoughtful questions or piggyback off of points they made earlier in the conversation. Also, when you are talking, you can practice active listening by building in pregnant pauses to allow the other person to show that they are active listening and ask you questions to show that they're processing what you're saying. Doing these things will make the other person you were talking to not just feel heard, but also seen. And that will make them feel good, and they will remember you in a way they wouldn't if you didn't practice this. Along those same lines is our next principle, which is generosity. A good friend of mine always likes to say, a lot of people think that you need to get so that you can then give. Conversely, he believes, and I believe, that you should give in order to get. How this translates to a networking situation is not leading with the things you need, but rather the things you can offer. Introductions, insights, resources. Using this approach builds trust and credibility long before you ever ask for anything. Beautiful thing about generosity is it compounds. A person you help today might not be able to return the favor right away, but you will burn into their mind and they will almost actively be looking for ways to pay you back. So if someone crosses their path, whom would be a good opportunity for you, they are much more likely to say, oh, you should talk to so and so. This next one's a little trickier to talk about, but it's power dynamics. When you're just starting out with a small business or are looking for work when you find yourself out of work, it's easy to feel vulnerable and to feel weak, like you don't have a lot to offer. However, regardless of where you are in your life's journey, you always have something to offer, and you should always be having those conversations, negotiating from an equal space, meaning you never want to go into a networking conversation where the other person has and you need, because you're setting up a scenario where that person feels all the weight to fix your life with what they have. Instead, you should go into every negotiation with full confidence, talking about all of the things you have to offer. Even if it doesn't feel like a lot, you should talk about it as if it is. And do not think that whatever it is you have to offer is lesser than whatever the other person has. The final principle I'd like to go over today is the follow-up. This does not just mean sending a "it was nice to meet you" text to someone after you meet them at a networking event. You never want to send anything that generic. You want to instead reference the conversation you have. And also, if you've been thinking about that person or the problems that they had to solve, in your follow-up, mention, hey, I've been thinking about that thing you've been struggling with and I have some thoughts on it. In this way, you are not just following up with a, hey, it's nice to meet you. You're talking about ways that the relationship can move forward and grow. Also, if there is mutual momentum to have a follow-up conversation based on your first follow-up, make sure that you suggest a specific time to meet. Be deliberate about getting on that person's calendar. And if your thought is, but they probably can't meet at that time, no, they probably can't. But if you're being very direct, they will instead say, well, no, I can't do 1 o'clock, but I could do 4 o'clock that day. And you're being intentional. And my last point about following up is those who eventually reach your inner circle, who become friends, make sure you ping them regularly. Use a CRM or an Excel spreadsheet or some sort of reminder system to make sure that every month you're checking in with those people that you've grown to care about, to show that you do care about them and to actively stay in their minds. To show these principles in action, I have a couple of examples here that I hope will make it easy for you to absorb this information. First is an example of a generic follow-up versus a thoughtful follow-up. On the left, you'll see the generic follow-up. It was nice meeting you at the chamber event last night. Let's stay in touch. No commitment, feels very much like a blow-off. Whereas if you look at the one on the right, it says, really enjoyed our conversation about how you're using automation in your HVAC business. I've been thinking about your challenge with technician scheduling. I actually know someone at Service Titan who might have some insights. Would love to grab coffee and continue the conversation. Are you free at Tuesday at 10 a.m.? So, shows that they remember what that person is looking to do, shows that they were actually actively thinking about their problems and being very direct about getting on that person's calendar. And then next we have an example of an unequal follow-up versus an equal follow-up. So if you see on the left, it says, "Hi, Mrs. Johnson. Thank you so much for speaking with me at the job fair. I would really appreciate any advice you could give about breaking into the industry. I know you're very busy, but if you have time, I'd be grateful for opportunity to learn from you." Listen to how much this person is leaning on that other person to say, you have what I need. Please give me what I need with nothing in return. And then also the very formal Ms. Johnson. Now, it could be argued that's just a respectful thing. However, it could come across as very genuflect-y. Instead, you want to try and converse as equals. So let's look at what an equal follow-up would look like. So see, instead of Mrs. Johnson, now we have, "Hi, Lisa. Really enjoyed our conversation about data-driven marketing in nonprofits. Your point about storytelling being the differentiator clicked for me. I've been developing those skills through my Habitat volunteer work. Would love to continue the conversation over coffee and share some campaigns I'm working on. Free next Tuesday at 10 a.m. So again, being very direct about getting on the calendar. And then also, even though she's unemployed, she is volunteering. So she's showing that even though I'm having trouble finding work, I'm staying busy and I'm learning and I'm thinking about things. So it is very possible to have value even when it's easy to think that you don't. You always have value. So that's it. I think we landed on 6 principles that if you're able to incorporate those into your networking, whether it's at events or at workshops or just people you meet at the grocery store, or if you're deliberate about using LinkedIn for connections, use these principles and your success rates on building real connections will be much higher. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video and we will talk again soon.